Hello, beautiful soul. I'm Aurora, and welcome to Twin Flame Journey, a space where we explore the deeper meaning behind soul connections, divine timing, and the path that leads two hearts back to union. If you've been feeling the signs, you're in the right place.
What if the person who once ran from you suddenly started running toward you? What if the silence that once came from them was replaced by curiosity messages, or even longing? And what if, by the time that happened, you were no longer the one chasing? In the twin flame journey, there is a dynamic that many people talk about: the runner and the chaser. It's a pattern that seems almost universal in the community. One person feels the connection deeply and tries to move closer, while the other feels overwhelmed and pulls away. But there is another phenomenon, one that confuses many people when it happens: the moment when the runner becomes the chaser. If you spend enough time reading stories from people on this journey, you'll start noticing a surprising pattern. At some point, someone says something like this: "I think I may have been the runner that turned into the chaser." At first, that statement sounds strange. After all, how can someone who spent months, or even years, avoiding the connection suddenly become the one longing for it? Yet this shift happens more often than people realize. And when it does, it can feel like the entire emotional gravity of the relationship has flipped. But before we understand why the runner becomes the chaser, we have to look at the beginning of the pattern itself. The runner-chaser dynamic usually starts shortly after the twin flames meet. The connection is intense, almost uncomfortably intense. Many people describe the first stage as magical: instant recognition, deep conversations, emotional intimacy that feels almost supernatural. It feels like you've known this person forever. But that intensity can also trigger something deeper. Because the twin flame connection doesn't just reveal love, it also reveals wounds. The chaser is often the one who feels the spiritual recognition first. They feel the connection, the purpose, the meaning behind the encounter. They want to move closer, to understand it, to nurture it. Meanwhile, the runner experiences the same connection but through a completely different emotional filter. For the runner, the depth of the bond can feel overwhelming. It may awaken fears they didn't know they had. Fear of vulnerability, fear of losing control, fear of being truly seen. So they do what many people do when emotions become too intense. They run. Sometimes the running is obvious: distance, ghosting, avoidance. Other times it's subtle: emotional walls, mixed signals, sudden coldness after moments of closeness. To the chaser, this behavior can feel confusing and painful. One moment the connection feels undeniable, and the next moment the runner disappears. So the chaser tries to restore the connection. They reach out. They send messages. They try to understand what went wrong. And slowly, almost without realizing it, they step into the role of the pursuer. This is how the chase begins. But here's something many people don't realize at first: the chase is not powered by love alone. It is powered by energy. In the beginning, the chaser pours enormous emotional energy into the connection. Their thoughts revolve around the runner. Their attention remains fixed on the relationship. Their hope keeps pulling them forward. The runner, on the other hand, moves away, but the energetic link remains. Imagine two magnets connected by an invisible thread. The harder one magnet pushes forward, the more the other feels the pressure and pulls away. And so the dynamic continues. The chaser tries harder. The runner retreats further. Weeks pass. Sometimes months. Sometimes years. From the outside, it can look like a tragic imbalance: one person loving too much, the other caring too little. But the deeper truth is more complicated. Because this stage of the journey is not just about the relationship between two people. It's about the relationship each person has with themselves. The chaser is learning about self-worth, boundaries, and inner healing. The runner is confronting fears of intimacy, vulnerability, and emotional exposure. And eventually, something happens that changes everything. The chaser becomes tired. Not angry. Not bitter. Just exhausted. They begin to realize that chasing someone endlessly does not bring peace. It only drains them. For many chasers, this realization does not come suddenly. It builds slowly through moments of disappointment, reflection, and emotional fatigue. They start asking themselves questions they never asked before. Why am I chasing someone who keeps running? Why does this connection hurt so much? Why do I feel like my happiness depends on someone else's response? These questions mark the beginning of a profound shift, because the chaser begins to understand something that changes the entire dynamic. The journey was never meant to be about chasing. It was meant to be about awakening. So gradually, the chaser starts to pull their energy back. They stop checking their phone every few minutes. They stop analyzing every message. They stop building their emotional world around the runner. Instead, they begin to focus on themselves, their healing, their growth, their peace. And when this happens, something remarkable begins to unfold. At first, the runner may not consciously notice the change. But energetically, something feels different. The familiar pull is gone. The emotional spotlight that once followed them everywhere has disappeared. Where there was once attention, there is now silence. Where there was once pursuit, there is now distance. And that is when the first crack appears in the runner's emotional armor. Because human beings are strangely sensitive to energetic shifts. We may not always understand them logically, but we feel them. And when the runner suddenly realizes that the chaser is no longer chasing, it creates a question they never had to ask before. What happened? Why did the energy change? Why does the absence of that attention suddenly feel noticeable? For the first time, the runner may start to look back, not because they planned to, but because something inside them has been stirred. The connection that once felt overwhelming now feels quiet. And in that quiet space, new emotions can surface. Curiosity, reflection, memory, and sometimes something even deeper, longing. But at this point in the story, the roles have not fully reversed yet. The shift has only just begun. The chaser has stepped out of the chase. The energetic balance is changing. And the runner is about to experience something they never expected. For the first time, they might start to feel what the chaser once felt. And that is where the real story begins. There comes a moment in many twin flame journeys that feels almost invisible from the outside. Yet internally it changes everything. It is the moment when the chaser stops chasing. Not as a strategy, not as a test, but as a genuine surrender. For a long time, the chaser believes that persistence will eventually bring the runner back. They believe that if they just explain the connection better, if they just show more love, more patience, more understanding, then the runner will finally see what they see. At first, this hope feels powerful. It feels noble. It feels like unconditional love. But slowly, the emotional weight of the chase begins to accumulate. Each unanswered message becomes heavier. Each moment of silence becomes louder. Each time the runner pulls away, the chaser feels the same question echoing in their mind. Why am I the only one trying? Many chasers reach a point where their entire emotional life revolves around the runner. Their day begins with thoughts about the connection. Their night ends with memories or imagined conversations. They analyze every small sign. A like on social media. A sudden view on a story. A short message after weeks of silence. Everything becomes a clue in a puzzle they are desperate to solve. But puzzles are meant to be solved by both sides. And when only one person is searching for answers, the search eventually becomes exhausting. For some people, this exhaustion builds slowly over time. For others, it arrives suddenly, like a wave that crashes after months of emotional tension. Maybe it happens after one more conversation that goes nowhere. Maybe it happens after another moment where the runner disappears again. Or maybe it happens during a quiet night when the chaser finally admits something to themselves that they were afraid to face before. I can't keep doing this. That moment is not weakness. It is clarity, because for the first time, the chaser begins to recognize the difference between love and attachment. Love gives energy. Attachment drains it. And the chaser realizes that somewhere along the way, their love for the runner became entangled with the fear of losing them. That fear created the chase, the constant thinking, the emotional dependency. But when the chaser begins to understand this, something important shifts inside them. Instead of asking, "How can I get them back?" they begin asking a different question. "How can I get myself back?" That question marks the beginning of a new phase. It is the phase of energetic withdrawal. At first, the change is subtle. The chaser does not wake up one day completely detached. Healing rarely works like that. Instead, the change begins with small decisions. They stop rereading old conversations. They stop checking the runner's social media every day. They stop waiting for messages that may never come. At first, these actions feel uncomfortable because chasing had become a habit. The mind is used to constantly scanning for signs of the runner. So when the chaser stops doing this, there is a strange emptiness. It can feel like silence inside their own thoughts. But that silence is not emptiness. It is space. Space for something new to grow. And slowly, the chaser begins to redirect their attention. They focus on things they neglected during the chase. Their personal goals, their friendships, their passions, their spiritual growth. They begin reconnecting with the parts of themselves that were placed on hold while they were trying to hold the connection together. Some chasers describe this phase as rediscovering who they were before the twin flame entered their life. Others describe it as becoming someone entirely new. Because the truth is, the chase changes people. It forces them to confront deep emotional patterns, abandonment fears, self-worth issues, and the need for validation. And when they start healing those patterns, their energy begins to transform. This transformation is not always visible to the runner at first. From the outside, it may look like nothing has changed. The chaser simply becomes quieter, more distant, less reactive. But on an energetic level, the shift is enormous. Imagine the connection between the runner and chaser like a current of electricity flowing between 2 points. For a long time, the chaser was sending most of the energy into that current. Their thoughts, emotions, and attention were constantly feeding it. But when the chaser begins to focus on themselves, that current weakens. The energy stops flowing in the same direction. And this is where the dynamic begins to change. Because the runner, whether consciously or unconsciously, has grown used to that energy. They may not admit it. They may not even understand it. But the presence of the chaser's attention became part of their emotional environment. It was something they could always feel in the background, even when they were running, even when they were distant, even when they told themselves the connection wasn't important. The chaser's energy was still there. Until one day, it isn't. At first, the runner may not notice immediately. Life continues as usual. Work, friends, daily responsibilities. But slowly, something begins to feel different. The familiar emotional pressure is gone. The silent presence of the chaser's attention is no longer there. And without realizing it, the runner may start asking themselves a quiet question. Why does it feel different now? Meanwhile, the chaser continues their healing. They begin to experience moments of peace that once felt impossible. Moments where the runner is not the center of their thoughts. Moments where their happiness no longer depends on someone else's behavior. For the first time since the chase began, they feel something powerful returning to them. Their energy, their identity, their independence. This does not mean the chaser stops caring about the runner completely. The connection still exists, but it no longer controls them. Instead of chasing the runner, they start walking their own path. And paradoxically, this is the moment when the dynamic begins to reverse. Because when the chaser finally lets go of the need to pursue, the energetic balance between them shifts. The magnet that once pushed forward has stepped back. The pressure that once made the runner retreat has disappeared. And now, for the first time, the runner is left alone with the silence of the connection. No pursuit. No emotional pressure. No constant reminders of what they were running from. Just space. And sometimes, space is the most powerful trigger of all. Because in that space, the runner can finally hear something they were too overwhelmed to notice before. Their own feelings. At first, those feelings may be faint. A memory. A sudden thought about the chaser. A moment of curiosity about what they're doing now. But emotions have a way of growing when they are given space. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the runner begins to turn their attention back toward the connection. Not because they were chased, but because the chase has finally ended. And that is the moment when the roles begin to blur. The runner is no longer simply running. The chaser is no longer chasing. The energy between them is shifting. And in that shift, a new question begins to emerge. What happens when the one who always ran begins to look back? There is a moment in the twin flame journey that many runners never expect. It is not a dramatic confrontation. It is not a sudden confession of love. It is not even a clear realization at first. It is simply silence. For a long time, the runner grows accustomed to the emotional presence of the chaser. Even if they avoid direct contact, even if they try to distance themselves physically or emotionally, there is always an underlying awareness that someone out there still holds space for them. Someone still thinks about them. Someone still cares. Someone still hopes. This invisible presence becomes part of the emotional background of the runner's life. It is almost like a quiet light that remains on in a room they rarely enter. They may not look at it. They may not acknowledge it. But they know it is there. And because it is always there, the runner never truly has to confront what the connection means. As long as the chaser continues to chase, the runner can stay in their familiar role. The one who steps away, the one who keeps distance, the one who maintains control over how close the connection can get. But when the chaser finally lets go, something unusual happens. The light turns off. At first, the runner may not notice immediately. Life continues as usual. They wake up, go to work, talk to friends, move through their daily routines. Yet somewhere in the background of their awareness, a subtle shift has taken place. The emotional pressure that once surrounded the connection is gone. The expectation of message is gone. The sense that someone is always reaching out gone. Instead, there is a quiet stillness. And strangely enough, that stillness can feel louder than all the chasing that came before. Human psychology has a curious relationship with attention. When something is constantly present, we eventually stop noticing it. It becomes part of the landscape of our lives. But when that presence suddenly disappears, our minds begin searching for it. The runner may start experiencing small moments of curiosity. Maybe they realize they haven't heard from the chaser in weeks. Maybe they notice that the chaser is no longer interacting with their social media. Maybe they remember how persistent the chaser used to be and how unusual it is that everything has suddenly stopped. These moments are subtle at first. A passing thought. A brief question. Nothing that feels significant. But thoughts have a way of growing when they are not immediately answered. The runner may begin to wonder. Why haven't they reached out? Did something happen? Are they angry? Have they moved on? For the first time since the dynamic began, the runner is the one thinking about the connection without being prompted by the chaser's actions. And this is where the emotional landscape begins to shift. Because when the chaser was actively pursuing the connection, the runner often experienced it as pressure. Even if the chaser's intentions were loving, the intensity could feel overwhelming. Messages could feel like demands. Conversations could feel like expectations. The runner might have felt that they needed to respond, explain themselves, or define something they were not ready to define. So their instinct was to retreat. But now that the pursuit has stopped, the emotional atmosphere is different. There is no pressure. There is no expectation. There is only space. And space allows emotions to emerge that were previously buried under the need to escape. Memories begin to surface. The runner might remember the moments that felt genuine between them and the chaser. Conversations that lasted for hours. Laughter that felt effortless. The strange sense of familiarity they felt when they first met. They might remember the way the chaser looked at them, with a kind of understanding that felt both comforting and unsettling. At the time, those moments may have been followed by fear. Fear of losing independence. Fear of emotional exposure. Fear of being drawn into something deeper than they were prepared for. So they ran. But now, with distance and silence surrounding the connection, those memories can be revisited without the same emotional pressure. And something interesting happens when memories are revisited in a calmer state. They begin to feel different. What once felt overwhelming may now feel meaningful. What once felt threatening may now feel rare. The runner might start asking themselves questions they never allowed themselves to consider before. Why did that connection feel so different from others? Why do I still remember those conversations so clearly? Why does the silence feel strange? Silence can be a powerful mirror. When external noise disappears, we are left with our own thoughts. For the runner, this can be an unfamiliar experience, because running is often a form of distraction. It allows someone to avoid confronting the emotions that feel too intense or too complicated. But without the chase, the runner has nothing to push against. The dynamic that once defined the relationship has dissolved. And without that dynamic, the runner must face the connection in a new way. Not as something they are escaping from, but as something they are remembering. This does not mean the runner suddenly becomes aware of everything all at once. Awakening rarely happens in a single dramatic moment. Instead, it unfolds gradually. One thought leads to another. One memory leads to curiosity. Curiosity leads to reflection. And reflection opens the door to something deeper. Emotion. The runner might begin to miss the chaser. Not necessarily in a dramatic or overwhelming way at first. It may start with something small. A sudden reminder of the chaser during a conversation with someone else. A place that reminds them of a shared memory. A song that brings back the feeling of being understood. These small moments accumulate, and over time, the runner begins to feel something they once avoided acknowledging. The absence of the chaser. What once felt like freedom from emotional pressure may begin to feel like a quiet emptiness, because the connection that once surrounded them is no longer reaching toward them. The person who once tried so hard to stay close is now focused on their own life, their own growth, their own peace. And the runner is left wondering about something they never had to consider before. What if I lost something important? This question can be unsettling. For someone who spent so much time running, the idea that the connection might truly disappear can feel unexpected. They may start revisiting past interactions in their mind, moments they once dismissed, words they once ignored, feelings they once avoided. And slowly, they begin to see the connection through a new lens. Not as something that trapped them, but as something that tried to reach them. For the first time, the runner may start feeling the same pull that the chaser once felt. A quiet desire to reconnect. A curiosity about what the chaser is doing now. A thought that appears unexpectedly during quiet moments. Maybe I should reach out. But this thought often comes with hesitation. Because reaching out means stepping into unfamiliar territory. It means acknowledging a connection they once tried to escape. It means risking vulnerability. Yet the silence of the chaser continues. And silence has a way of amplifying unresolved emotions. Days turn into weeks. Weeks turn into months. And the runner's thoughts about the chaser appear more frequently. What began as curiosity may slowly transform into longing. The dynamic that once seemed permanent, the runner always running, the chaser always chasing, is no longer stable. The chaser has stepped away. The runner has begun looking back. And somewhere within this quiet reversal, a new possibility begins to emerge. What happens when the one who ran away starts moving toward the connection? Because when that moment finally arrives, the entire emotional balance between them begins to change. And the runner may discover something surprising about themselves. They're no longer running. They are searching. There is a subtle turning point in many twin flame stories, a moment so quiet that it can pass unnoticed even by the people experiencing it. It is the moment when the runner stops looking forward and begins to look back. For a long time, the runner's energy has been directed in one direction, away. Away from the intensity of the connection, away from the vulnerability it demanded, away from the emotional mirror that the chaser unknowingly held up to them. Running, in many ways, was a form of protection. The runner may not have consciously planned it this way. They didn't wake up one day and say, "I will run from this person." Instead, the instinct appeared naturally, almost automatically. when the depth of the connection began to touch something sensitive inside them. When someone sees you too clearly, it can be both beautiful and terrifying. The chaser often sensed things about the runner that others did not. They saw beneath the surface, the strengths, the fears, the emotional patterns the runner had spent years learning how to hide. And being seen that deeply can feel like standing in bright light after living in shadows. So the runner retreated. Distance became their shield. Silence became their safety. If they didn't respond, they didn't have to explain. If they kept their emotions hidden, they didn't have to confront them. For a while, this strategy worked. Life continued moving forward. The runner focused on work, responsibilities, friendships, or even other relationships. The twin flame connection became something they occasionally thought about, but rarely explored deeply. Meanwhile, the chaser's presence in their life slowly faded. The messages stopped. The attempts to reconnect disappeared. The emotional pressure that once surrounded the connection dissolved into quiet space. At first, the runner may have felt relief. Finally, there were no difficult conversations waiting for them. No expectations to respond. No emotional intensity knocking at the door of their carefully maintained independence. But relief has a strange way of evolving over time. When pressure disappears, space appears. And space has a powerful effect on the human mind. Without constant stimulation or distraction, thoughts begin to wander. Memories resurface. Questions begin forming where none existed before. The runner might find themselves thinking about the chaser at unexpected moments. Maybe during a quiet evening when nothing demands their attention. Maybe during a conversation with someone else that somehow reminds them of the chaser's perspective. Maybe during a moment of emotional vulnerability, when they realize that few people truly understood them the way the chaser once did. At first, these thoughts feel random, almost accidental. But as days pass, they begin to appear more frequently. The runner might start wondering what the chaser is doing now. Have they moved on? Are they happier? Do they still think about the connection? These questions may lead the runner to do something they rarely did before. They begin to look back. Perhaps they scroll through old messages they once ignored. Perhaps they revisit memories they pushed aside. Perhaps they look at old photos or recall conversations that once felt too intense to process. And when these memories return, they do not always carry the same emotional weight they once did. Time has softened some of the fear. Distance has created perspective. The runner might begin noticing something they overlooked before. The sincerity in the chaser's words. The patience the chaser showed during difficult moments. The depth of understanding that seemed almost unnatural at the time. They might begin to see that the chaser wasn't trying to control them. They were trying to connect. This realization can be unsettling, because it challenges the story the runner once told themselves. For a long time, running felt justified. It felt necessary. But now, looking back with new awareness, the runner may start recognizing moments where they pushed the chaser away not because the connection was wrong, but because it felt too real. And reality can be frightening when it touches the parts of ourselves we try to avoid. This shift in perspective does not immediately transform the runner into a chaser, but it plants a seed of curiosity. Curiosity leads to observation. The runner might start paying more attention to the chaser's life from a distance. Maybe they check their social media occasionally. Maybe they notice the chaser seems calmer, happier, more independent. Maybe they sense that the person who once revolved around them is now walking confidently in their own direction. This change can create a surprising emotional reaction. Instead of feeling chased, the runner may start feeling intrigued, because the chaser's energy has transformed. The desperation that once fueled the chase has disappeared. In its place is something different. Confidence, peace, self-focus. Ironically, this is often the moment when the runner begins to feel the same magnetic pull that once overwhelmed them. But now it feels different. It no longer feels like pressure. It feels like curiosity, like a quiet question waiting for an answer. Who are they becoming? The runner may begin noticing small details about the chaser's growth. Perhaps they see the chaser pursuing new goals, building new friendships, exploring new parts of themselves. And the runner realizes something unexpected. The chaser's world no longer revolves around them. For someone who once felt pursued, this realization can be surprisingly powerful, because attention is something humans often take for granted until it disappears. When the chaser stops offering that constant emotional attention, the runner becomes aware of its absence. And that absence creates a vacuum, a space that invites reflection. The runner may begin asking themselves deeper questions. Why does it feel strange that they stopped reaching out? Why do I keep thinking about them lately? Why does it feel like something important changed? These questions can lead to a deeper realization. The connection never truly disappeared. It simply transformed. The energetic bond that once pushed the runner away is now quiet enough for them to observe it, without fear. And within that quiet observation, something begins to grow. Interest, concern, possibility. For the first time, the runner may start considering something they never allowed themselves to imagine before. What if the connection was real? What if the person they ran from was not trying to trap them, but trying to meet them halfway? What if the space that now exists between them is not the end of the story, but the beginning of a different chapter? These thoughts may remain private. The runner may not speak about them to anyone. They may not even fully understand them yet. But the direction of their attention has changed. Instead of running forward, they are looking back. And looking back is the first step towards something else. Movement. Because once a runner begins to look back long enough, the question eventually becomes unavoidable. Should I reach out? That question carries both hope and fear. Hope because it opens the door to reconnection. Fear because it means stepping into vulnerability. Yet the seed has already been planted. The runner is no longer simply escaping the connection. They are reflecting on it. They are feeling its absence. They are wondering about its meaning. And somewhere inside them, a quiet shift is taking place. The person who once ran from the connection is now standing still, looking in the direction they once fled. And the longer they stand there, the more likely it becomes that one day, instead of running away, they might take a step back toward it. There is a stage in the twin flame journey that many runners never imagine they will experience. For a long time, the runner believes they are the one in control of the distance. They believe they are the one deciding how close or how far the connection can go. If things become too intense, they step back. If emotions start surfacing, they create space. From their perspective, the ability to run feels like freedom. They are not trapped. They are not obligated. They are not forced into something they are not ready to face. And because the chaser continues reaching out during the early phases of the journey, the runner rarely feels the full impact of separation. Even when they pull away, the connection is still alive through the chaser's energy. There are messages, attempts to reconnect, emotional signals that remind the runner that someone out there still cares deeply. In many ways, the runner experiences the connection from a position of emotional distance, but energetic security. The chaser's attention acts like an invisible safety net. It reassures the runner that the bond is still there, even if they are not actively participating in it. But everything changes when the chaser stops chasing. At first, the runner might interpret the silence as temporary. Maybe the chaser is just taking a break. Maybe they are busy. Maybe they are upset and will eventually return. But days pass, then weeks, then months, and something unusual begins to happen. The runner realizes that the chaser is truly gone from the dynamic. Not physically gone from the world, of course, but gone from the role they once played. The messages are no longer arriving. The emotional pursuit has disappeared. The familiar sense of being energetically held by someone has faded. For the first time since the connection began, the runner is left alone with the full experience of separation. And this is when something unexpected begins to unfold. The runner starts to feel the loss. Loss is a powerful teacher. Often, people only recognize the value of something after it is no longer present. When the chaser was constantly reaching out, the runner could focus on what felt overwhelming about the connection. The intensity, the emotional depth, the sense of being seen too clearly. But now that the chase has stopped, the runner begins noticing something different. What is missing? They might begin recalling the small things they once overlooked. The way the chaser listened carefully during conversations. The way they remembered small details about the runner's life. The way they expressed genuine care, even when the runner remained distant. These memories may arrive quietly at first, perhaps during a moment of solitude, perhaps during a random thought that interrupts their routine. And with each memory, a realization begins forming. The chaser was not just pursuing them. They were offering something rare. Understanding, patience, emotional presence. These qualities often become clearer in absence than they ever were in presence. Because when someone is constantly giving, it can be easy to take that energy for granted. But when it disappears, the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. The runner may start noticing that their life feels slightly different now. Not dramatically empty, not suddenly lonely, but subtly quieter. The emotional mirror the chaser once provided is no longer there. No one is asking the questions that once made the runner reflect on their deeper feelings. No one is holding space for their vulnerabilities in the same way. And without realizing it, the runner may begin missing something they once tried to escape. Connection. This stage can be confusing for the runner. After all, they spent so much time convincing themselves that distance was necessary. They told themselves the connection was too intense, too complicated, too demanding. But now that the chaser has stepped away, those explanations may begin to feel incomplete. Because if the connection truly meant nothing, why does the silence feel so noticeable? Why do memories appear so often? Why does the absence of the chaser create a quiet emotional echo? These questions can slowly transform into something deeper. Regret. Regret does not always appear dramatically. Sometimes it begins as a simple realization. I may have pushed away someone who truly cared. That realization can be unsettling, especially for someone who's spent so long maintaining emotional distance. Because recognizing the value of the connection means confronting the possibility that the runner's fear, not the connection itself, was the real obstacle. And fear can be difficult to face. But loss has a way of revealing truths that avoidance cannot hide forever. The runner may start replaying moments in their mind. Times when the chaser reached out with kindness. Times when they tried to communicate openly. Times when they showed patience during periods of silence. Looking back, the runner might realize something surprising. The chaser was not trying to force anything. They were simply trying to keep the connection alive. And now that effort is gone, this awareness can create a new emotional tension within the runner. A tension between their past behavior and their present understanding. Part of them may still feel cautious about reopening the connection, but another part of them begins to feel something they never allowed themselves to experience before. Longing. Longing is different from curiosity. Curiosity asks questions. Longing feels the absence. The runner may begin wondering what the chaser's life looks like now. Have they found someone else? Have they moved on emotionally? Are they happier without the connection? These questions are not just about the chaser. They are reflections of the runner's own growing awareness. The connection mattered, perhaps more than they once admitted. And as this awareness grows, the emotional roles within the dynamic begin to shift. The chaser is no longer actively seeking the runner's attention. They are focusing on themselves, their healing, their growth, their independence. Meanwhile, the runner finds their thoughts drifting more frequently toward the person they once avoided. The emotional gravity between them is changing direction. What once felt like pressure now feels like absence. What once felt overwhelming now feels meaningful. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the runner begins experiencing something new. The desire to reconnect. At first, this desire may remain hidden beneath layers of hesitation. The runner may question whether reaching out is a good idea. They may wonder if the chaser still cares. They may fear rejection or awkwardness. After all, they spent so much time maintaining distance. What if it is too late? Yet the more they think about the connection, the more difficult it becomes to ignore the feeling that something unfinished remains between them. The runner is no longer simply running. They are remembering. They are reflecting. They are beginning to feel the emotional weight of what was once offered to them. And that realization marks the beginning of a profound transformation. Because when the runner truly begins to feel the loss of the chaser's presence, something shifts deep within their emotional landscape. The dynamic that once defined their relationship is dissolving. The runner is no longer escaping the connection. They're starting to move toward it, internally if not yet externally. And this internal movement is the first sign that the roles within the journey are about to change. The one who once ran may soon become the one searching. The one who once avoided connection may soon become the one seeking it. The runner is beginning to understand something that the chaser learned much earlier. The connection was never just about pursuit. It was about recognition. And now that recognition is slowly awakening within them, the question that once belonged only to the chaser is now forming in the runner's mind. What if I should reach out? And when that question finally becomes strong enough to overcome fear, the dynamic between them will enter a completely new phase. Because the runner may soon discover what it feels like to step into the role they once avoided. The role of the one who chases. For a long time in the twin flame journey, the emotional current seems to flow in only one direction. The chaser moves toward the connection. The runner moves away from it. This pattern can feel so consistent that many people assume it will always remain the same. The roles seem fixed, almost like characters in a story that cannot change their nature. The chaser is the one who feels deeply. The runner is the one who escapes. But the twin flame dynamic is not a static story. It is a living, energetic relationship, constantly evolving as both people grow, heal, and transform. And eventually, something happens that begins to change the direction of the emotional current. The energy begins to reverse. This shift rarely happens suddenly. There is no single moment where both people wake up and instantly switch roles. Instead, the reversal develops gradually, like the slow turning of a tide. The first part of the shift happens when the chaser stops feeding the dynamic with constant attention. When the chaser was actively pursuing the connection, they were unconsciously supplying the majority of the emotional energy within the bond. Their thoughts were focused on the runner. Their emotions were tied to the outcome of the relationship. They were investing time, hope, and attention into maintaining the connection. But when the chaser begins focusing on themselves instead, that flow of energy changes direction. The runner may not consciously understand what is happening, but they can feel the difference. The emotional spotlight that once followed them everywhere is gone. The quiet reassurance that someone was always thinking about them has disappeared. And without that constant stream of attention, the runner begins experiencing something unfamiliar. They begin to feel the pull of the connection themselves. This is where the energetic reversal begins. At first, the runner's feelings might appear as simple curiosity. They might wonder what the chaser is doing now. They might check their social media occasionally. They might revisit memories they once ignored. But curiosity has a way of growing when it is not immediately satisfied. The runner may notice that the chaser seems different, more peaceful, more independent, less focused on the connection. This transformation can be surprising, because during the earlier stages of the journey, the chaser's identity seemed closely tied to the runner. Their attention was always directed toward the relationship. Now that attention has shifted inward, and that shift creates a new emotional dynamic. When someone who once chased you stops chasing, it can awaken something unexpected. Interest. The runner may begin to see the chaser in a new light. Instead of appearing emotionally dependent, the chaser now appears self-contained. Instead of seeking validation from the runner, they seem confident in their own path. This change can be deeply magnetic, because human beings are naturally drawn to people who carry a sense of inner stability. The runner might begin asking themselves questions that never appeared before. Why do they seem different now? Why do they feel harder to reach? Why am I suddenly thinking about them more? These questions signal an important shift. The runner is no longer simply reacting to the chaser's pursuit. They are actively thinking about the connection on their own. The energy that once flowed outward from the chaser is now circulating within the runner. This internal shift can feel confusing. The runner may struggle to understand why their thoughts keep returning to the same person they once tried to avoid. They may tell themselves that nothing has changed, yet their mind continues drifting back to the connection. Memories surface more often. Conversations replay in their mind. Moments that once felt overwhelming now feel strangely meaningful. This is the beginning of emotional gravity changing direction. Before, the chaser felt pulled toward the runner. Now, the runner begins feeling that same pull. And the longer the chaser remains focused on their own life, the stronger this reversal can become. Because the chaser's independence removes the pressure that once triggered the runner's instinct to escape. Without that pressure, the runner can observe the connection from a calmer emotional state. They can feel the attraction without feeling trapped. They can acknowledge their curiosity without needing to run from it. In many cases, this is when the runner begins to reach out again. At first, the contact might be small. A casual message, a brief check-in, a reaction to something the chaser posted. From the outside, these actions may appear simple, but internally, they represent a major shift in the dynamic. For someone who once avoided connection, even a small step toward communication can require courage. The runner may feel nervous about how the chaser will respond. They may wonder if the chaser still cares. They may fear that their previous distance caused too much damage. But the curiosity that has been building inside them pushes them forward. They want to know if the connection still exists. And in many cases, the chaser responds differently than before. Instead of immediately pouring energy back into the relationship, they respond calmly. They may be kind, but they are no longer emotionally dependent on the interaction. Their life continues whether the runner stays or leaves. This balanced response can surprise the runner, because the emotional roles have subtly shifted. The chaser is no longer chasing. The runner is no longer running. Instead, the runner may find themselves initiating conversations, wondering when the chaser will reply, thinking about what the next interaction might be. In other words, they begin experiencing the emotional position the chaser once occupied. This is the moment when many people in the twin flame community realize something surprising. The runner has started becoming the chaser, not because anyone forced the change, not because the chaser manipulated the situation, but because the energy within the connection has naturally rebalanced. When one person withdraws excessive emotional investment and focuses on their own growth, the dynamic between both individuals transforms. The energetic scales begin to equalize. And sometimes they even tip in the opposite direction. The runner begins feeling the urgency that once belonged to the chaser, the desire to reconnect, the curiosity about the other person's life, the subtle fear that the connection might disappear completely. Meanwhile, the chaser experiences something they rarely felt before: freedom. They are no longer waiting for the runner to return. They are no longer structuring their emotional world around someone else's decisions. They're simply living their life. Ironically, this independence often makes the connection more balanced than it ever was during the chase, because the relationship is no longer fueled by desperation. It is fueled by mutual awareness. Yet the reversal is not always easy for the runner. Feeling the pull of the connection can bring up emotions they once avoided: regret, vulnerability, uncertainty. They may realize that the person who once waited patiently for them has grown beyond the old dynamic. And that realization can be both inspiring and intimidating, because if the runner truly wants to reconnect, they may have to do something they once avoided. They may have to pursue the connection themselves. They may have to express feelings they once hid. They may have to step into the role of the one who reaches out first. In other words, they may have to become the chaser. This is the stage where many runners begin understanding the emotional experience the chaser lived through for so long. The waiting, the wondering, the hope. And this understanding can lead to profound growth. Because when both people experience both sides of the dynamic, empathy emerges. The runner begins realizing how much courage it took for the chaser to remain open for so long. And the chaser begins recognizing that the runner's distance was often rooted in fear rather than indifference. The energetic reversal is not about punishment or revenge. It is about balance. The universe, in its own mysterious way, allows both individuals to experience the lessons they need in order to grow. The chaser learns self-worth and independence. The runner learns vulnerability and emotional presence. And when the energy between them finally reaches equilibrium, something new becomes possible. Not a chase, not an escape, but a conscious connection built on mutual awareness. Yet before that stage can fully unfold, the runner must face one more realization. They are no longer simply observing the connection from a distance. They are now emotionally involved in it. And the deeper that involvement grows, the more clearly one truth begins to emerge. The roles have changed. The runner who once ran away is now moving toward the connection. And the person they once avoided may now hold the emotional balance within the relationship. The chase has reversed. And the journey is entering an entirely new chapter. There comes a moment in the twin flame journey that can feel almost surreal. For a long time, the emotional story seemed predictable. One person chased, the other ran. One person reached out, the other stayed distant. One person waited, hoping the connection would eventually return to balance. Then slowly and quietly something changes. The person who once ran begins to reach out. For many runners, this moment does not arrive with complete confidence. In fact, it often begins with hesitation, uncertainty, and a surprising amount of vulnerability. After all, the runner spent so much time avoiding emotional exposure. Distance was their way of maintaining control. Silence was their way of protecting themselves from feelings they did not know how to handle. But the energetic shift that occurred when the chasers stopped chasing has already changed something inside them. They have begun to feel the absence. They have begun to remember the connection. They have begun to question the story they once told themselves about why they ran. And eventually, these thoughts converge into a single, unavoidable impulse: the desire to reconnect. At first, the runner might resist this impulse. They might tell themselves that reaching out would reopen something complicated. They might wonder whether the chaser even wants to hear from them anymore. After all, the dynamic has changed. The chaser who once waited patiently is no longer sending messages. They are no longer pursuing the relationship with the same intensity. Their life seems to be moving forward in a new direction. And that realization can create a quiet fear within the runner. What if it's too late? What if the person who once cared so deeply has moved on? What if the connection that once seemed impossible to ignore has now faded completely? These questions can create a strange emotional tension. Part of the runner wants to stay silent, maintaining the distance they have always relied on. But another part of them, one that has grown stronger since the energetic reversal, wants to close the distance that now exists between them and the chaser. Eventually, curiosity and longing become stronger than hesitation. And that is when the runner does something they once avoided. They reach out. The first message is rarely dramatic. It may be simple: "Hey, how have you been?" Or perhaps something even smaller: a reaction to a post, a comment on something the chaser shared, an attempt to re-enter the conversation without making the emotional weight too obvious. From the outside, this message might seem ordinary, but internally, it represents a major transformation. For someone who once escaped the connection, initiating contact can feel like stepping into unfamiliar emotional territory. The runner may feel nervous while waiting for a response. They may check their phone more often than usual. They may wonder whether the chaser will reply warmly or not at all. And in this waiting, something unexpected happens. The runner begins experiencing the same emotional state the chaser once lived with: anticipation, hope, uncertainty. This emotional shift can be eye-opening, because for the first time, the runner understands what it feels like to place emotional energy into the connection without knowing how the other person will respond. Meanwhile, the chaser's reaction often surprises the runner. The chaser may respond kindly, but they are no longer desperate for the conversation to continue. They are no longer pouring all their emotional attention into the interaction. Their response feels calm, balanced, grounded. This difference can feel confusing for the runner, because they remember a time when any message from them would ignite a wave of emotional enthusiasm. From the chaser. Now, the interaction feels different. Not cold, not distant, but independent. The chaser is no longer orbiting around the runner. They are standing in their own center. And, ironically, this independence can make the runner feel even more drawn toward them. Because the dynamic that once pushed the runner away, constant emotional pursuit, is no longer present. Instead, there's space. Space for conversation. Space for curiosity. Space for the runner to explore the connection at their own pace. Yet as the runner continues reaching out, they may begin noticing something else. They are initiating more often. They are thinking about the chaser more frequently. They are wondering when the next interaction will happen. And gradually, a realization begins forming. The roles have changed. The person who once chased is now calm and centered. The person who once ran is now moving toward the connection. In other words, the runner has stepped into the emotional position the chaser once occupied. This realization can be both surprising and humbling, because it forces the runner to reflect on the past from a completely different perspective. They may begin remembering how persistent the chaser once was, how many times they reached out, how many emotional risks they took to keep the connection alive. And now, standing on the other side of the dynamic, the runner begins to understand something they could not see before. Chasing requires courage. It requires vulnerability. It requires the willingness to risk rejection in order to express genuine feelings. For someone who spent so long avoiding emotional exposure, this understanding can be transformative. The runner may start feeling a deeper sense of empathy for the chaser. They may realize that the person they once perceived as overly intense was simply expressing a truth they themselves were not ready to face. And now that they are beginning to feel that truth, their behavior naturally shifts. They reach out more often. They show curiosity about the chaser's life. They look for opportunities to reconnect. Not because they are trying to control the relationship, but because they genuinely want to understand whether the connection still exists. Yet even as the runner moves toward the chaser, they may sense that something has fundamentally changed. The chaser is no longer the same person they once knew. They have grown. They have healed. They have learned how to hold their own emotional center without relying on the runner's presence. This growth can feel inspiring, but it can also create a subtle challenge for the runner. Because if they truly want to reconnect now, they cannot rely on the old dynamic. They cannot expect the chaser to carry the emotional weight of the relationship. Instead, they must participate in the connection as an equal. They must communicate openly. They must acknowledge the feelings they once avoided. And they must accept the possibility that the chaser may or may not choose to return to the relationship. This stage of the journey is where the true transformation of the runner begins. Not because they suddenly become perfect or fearless, but because they begin doing something they never did before. They lean toward the connection instead of running from it. They express curiosity instead of silence. They reach out instead of retreating. And through these small actions, the energetic balance between both people continues to shift. The runner is no longer just remembering the connection. They are actively exploring it again. They are stepping into vulnerability. They are discovering what it feels like to care deeply about someone who may or may not respond in the way they hope. In other words, they are walking the same emotional path the chaser once walked. The journey has come full circle. The roles that once seemed permanent have dissolved. The runner has become the one who reaches out. And the person they once ran from may now hold the quiet power of choice. But this reversal is not about winning or losing. It is about understanding. Because when both people have experienced both sides of the dynamic, the chasing and the running, they begin to see the connection with new clarity. They begin to understand the fears, the hopes, and the lessons hidden within every stage of the journey. And this shared understanding opens the door to something that was impossible during the earlier phases. A balanced connection. Not a chase. Not an escape. But a meeting between two people who have finally learned how to face the connection without fear. There is a moment in the twin flame journey that many people in the community describe as the true turning point. It is not the first meeting. It is not the intense stage of chasing and running. It is not even the painful period of separation. The real turning point arrives much later. It arrives when the chaser truly stops chasing. At first glance, this might sound simple. After all, the chaser may have already stopped sending messages or trying to reconnect long ago. From the outside, it may appear that they have already let go. But there is an important difference between stopping the actions of chasing and releasing the energy of chasing. For a long time, even when the chaser stops reaching out physically, their thoughts may still revolve around the runner. They still wonder what the runner is doing. They still imagine possible reunions. They still carry emotional attachment to how the story might unfold. In other words, the chase may continue internally, even if it no longer exists externally. But eventually something deeper happens. The chaser reaches a stage where their inner world no longer revolves around the connection. Not because they forced themselves to forget, not because they became bitter or resentful, but because they finally rediscovered their own center. This shift often comes after a long period of emotional growth. The chaser has spent time healing old wounds. They have reflected on the lessons the journey revealed about themselves. They have rebuilt parts of their life that once felt neglected during the chase. Slowly, their identity stops being defined by the connection. They are no longer the person waiting. They are simply a person living their life. And this transformation changes the energetic structure of the relationship completely. Because when the chaser was still emotionally attached to the outcome, a subtle energetic thread remained connected to the runner. Even if the runner did not consciously notice it, that thread existed. The chaser was still holding space for the possibility of reunion. But when the chaser truly releases the need for that outcome, the energetic thread relaxes. Not necessarily disappearing entirely, but loosening its grip. The connection becomes lighter, more neutral, less emotionally charged. And this is often the moment when the runner begins reaching out more actively. The runner, who once felt overwhelmed by the chaser's emotional intensity, now encounters a completely different energy. Instead of urgency, there is calm. Instead of longing, there is peace. Instead of emotional dependence, there is independence. This change can be profoundly confusing for the runner, because the person they once knew behaved very differently. In the past, the chaser's world seemed deeply intertwined with the runner's presence. Now the chaser appears comfortable whether the runner is present or not. Their happiness no longer depends on the connection. Their life is moving forward. And ironically, this independence can create a stronger magnetic pull than the chase ever did. Human beings are naturally drawn to people who possess inner stability. When someone radiates a sense of self-sufficiency, it signals emotional maturity. And emotional maturity creates a feeling of safety. The runner, who once feared being overwhelmed by the connection, now senses that the emotional environment has changed. The connection no longer feels like a storm. It feels like calm water. And calm water invites exploration. This is often when the runner begins making more deliberate efforts to reconnect. They may initiate conversations more frequently. They may show interest in the chaser's life. They may attempt to rebuild communication that once felt impossible. But something is different now. The chaser is no longer chasing. They are no longer trying to steer the relationship in a particular direction. They respond authentically, but without attachment. They are present in the moment, yet not dependent on where the interaction leads. For the runner, this shift can feel both comforting and unsettling. Comforting because the emotional pressure they once feared is gone. Unsettling because the familiar dynamic they relied on has disappeared. In the past, the runner always knew their role. If things became too intense, they could step back. If the chaser reached out, they could choose whether to respond. The emotional structure of the relationship was predictable. But now the structure has changed. The chaser is no longer playing their previous role. They are not chasing. They are not waiting. They are simply existing in their own space. And this means the runner must now decide how much effort they are willing to invest in the connection. For someone who spent years avoiding emotional responsibility, this can feel like a significant challenge. Because real connection requires participation. It requires honesty. It requires vulnerability. The runner may begin realizing that if they truly want to reconnect with the chaser now, they cannot rely on the old dynamic. They must step forward willingly. They must express interest without being prompted. They must acknowledge feelings they once kept hidden. This realization can be both empowering and intimidating. Empowering because the runner finally has the opportunity to engage with the connection from a place of awareness rather than fear. Intimidating because vulnerability always carries risk. The chaser, after all, has grown stronger. They no longer need the connection in the same way they once did, which means the runner cannot assume the relationship will automatically return to its previous
form.
Instead, they must approach it as something new, something that must be built again from the ground up. Meanwhile, the chaser continues living their life. They pursue their passions. They deepen their friendships. They focus on their own personal growth. The runner may notice that the chaser seems happier than before, more relaxed, more confident, and this observation can lead to a surprising emotional reaction.
Pride.
Even though the runner once feared the intensity of the connection, they may now feel proud of the person the chaser has become. They may realize that the journey, even the painful parts, helped both of them grow. The chaser learned self-worth. The runner learned emotional awareness. And both of them transformed in ways they never expected when the connection first began. This stage of the journey is often misunderstood. Many people believe the goal of the twin flame path is reunion. But the deeper purpose is transformation. The chaser's growth into independence is one half of that transformation. The runner's awakening to vulnerability is the other half. When both of these shifts occur, the dynamic between them becomes fundamentally different. No one is chasing. No one is running. Instead, there is simply the possibility of connection. Two individuals standing on equal emotional ground. Whether they choose to move closer together or continue walking their own paths becomes a matter of conscious choice rather than emotional compulsion. And that is the moment when the journey finally reaches balance. The moment when the chaser no longer chases. Not because the connection failed, but because the lesson has been learned. Love cannot grow through pursuit alone. It grows through self-awareness, mutual respect, and the willingness of both people to meet each other without fear. And when that moment arrives, the entire meaning of the connection changes. The chase is over. The running is over. What remains is something far more powerful. Freedom. Freedom to reconnect. Freedom to walk away. Freedom to choose the connection not out of need, but out of genuine alignment. And when love is chosen from that place, it no longer feels like a chase. It feels like a meeting of two souls who finally understand themselves. For a long time on the twin flame journey, connection feels like effort. You meditate to reach them. You look for signs. You replay memories. You try to understand every dream, every number, every strange coincidence. But something begins to change after a certain level of inner healing. One day, almost without warning, you realize something surprising. You can feel them, even when you are not trying. And that realization becomes one of the quiet turning points of the entire journey. At first, it happens subtly. You might be going about an ordinary moment, washing dishes, walking outside, working at your desk, or lying in bed late at night. Your mind is not thinking about your twin flame. There is no longing, no analyzing, just life. Then suddenly, a wave of emotion appears. Not sadness exactly, not happiness either, just a presence, a warmth in the chest, a soft pressure around the heart. And in that instant, without needing proof or explanation,
They are thinking about you.
Many people on the twin flame path expect connection to always feel dramatic. They imagine intense visions, powerful energy surges, or overwhelming emotions. But real energetic connection often becomes quieter over time, more natural, more stable. Instead of chasing the connection, you simply exist within it. And that is when telepathic awareness begins to feel effortless. You may notice small patterns that start repeating. Sometimes you suddenly hear their voice in your mind, not as a hallucination, but more like a remembered tone. You might hear a phrase they used to say, a joke they always repeated, a nickname only they called you. It happens quickly. So quickly that at first you might dismiss it as imagination. But then something strange happens. Minutes later, you receive a message from them. Or you see their name somewhere unexpectedly. Or someone mentions them in conversation. And you realize the moment you heard them was the same moment they were thinking about you. This kind of connection can feel confusing at first. You might question your own mind. Am I making this up? Is this just coincidence? But over time, the experiences begin to stack up. Again, and again, and again. The patterns become too consistent to ignore. One of the most powerful aspects of this stage is emotional mirroring. You may suddenly feel a wave of emotion that seems completely unrelated to your current situation. For example, you might wake up feeling unusually anxious for no clear reason. Your day might be going perfectly fine, yet your heart feels heavy. Hours later, you find out your twin flame was going through something difficult at that exact time. Or the opposite might happen. You feel sudden joy, a sense of relief, a deep calm. Later you learn they just overcame something important in their life. When this happens enough times, you start to understand something profound. Your emotional systems are no longer completely separate. This does not mean you lose your individuality. That is a common misunderstanding. The twin flame journey is not about becoming the same person. It is about learning how two souls can remain whole while still being energetically connected. Think of it like two instruments playing in the same orchestra. Each instrument keeps its own sound, but they still resonate within the same harmony. When one shifts slightly, the entire symphony subtly adjusts. Another moment many twin flames describe during this phase is sensing physical sensations connected to the other person. For example, you might feel warmth on your shoulder, a sudden chill down your spine, a gentle tingling in your hands. These sensations usually appear briefly and then disappear. They are not painful, not overwhelming, just noticeable enough to make you pause. At first you might think it is random, but when it keeps happening during moments when your twin flame is thinking about you, or even trying to reach you emotionally, you begin to recognize the pattern. Your body has become sensitive to their energy. Dreams also become clearer during this stage. Earlier in the journey, dreams about your twin flame may have felt chaotic or symbolic. But as your inner balance improves, dreams start to feel more vivid and peaceful. You may dream about simple things. Walking together,
Talking.
laughing. Sometimes nothing dramatic happens at all. Yet when you wake up, the feeling lingers strongly, almost as if the interaction actually occurred on another level of consciousness. Many twin flames later discover that their counterpart had a similar dream the same night. Even if the details differ, the emotional atmosphere is identical.
Calm.
Connected.
Familiar.
What surprises many people most about this phase is how little desperation remains. Earlier in the journey, connection often feels tied to longing. You miss them constantly. You want answers. You want reunion. You want clarity. But once energetic awareness stabilizes, something shifts inside you. You no longer feel the need to chase the connection, because you already know it exists. Not intellectually, not as a belief, but as a quiet certainty inside your heart. This certainty brings a new kind of peace. You stop checking your phone every few minutes. You stop wondering what they're doing every second of the day. You stop needing constant signs from the universe. The connection has become internal instead of external. You feel it without needing proof. And ironically, this is often when external communication begins to happen more naturally. When you are no longer forcing the connection, the energy between you becomes lighter, more balanced. Your twin flame can feel that shift. Even if they cannot explain it logically, they may start thinking about you more often. Not because you are chasing them energetically anymore, but because your calm presence is no longer triggering their fear. One of the deepest realizations of this stage is understanding that true twin flame connection does not require constant physical interaction. The bond exists beyond distance, beyond time zones, beyond silence. Even if you have not spoken in months or years, the energetic link remains active.
Quiet.
But alive. You might be living completely separate lives on the surface. Different cities, different relationships, different daily routines. Yet sometimes, in the middle of an ordinary moment, you feel that familiar pulse in your heart. And you know, they felt it too. This stage teaches an important spiritual lesson. Love does not always need to be loud to be real. Sometimes the most powerful connections are the ones that exist quietly in the background of life. Not demanding attention, not forcing outcomes, just existing. Like gravity. Invisible, yet impossible to deny. As this awareness deepens, you begin to trust the connection in a different way. You stop trying to control where the journey will lead. Instead, you allow life to unfold naturally. If reunion is meant to happen, it will. If more healing is needed, that will happen too. Either way, the connection itself is no longer a mystery. You can feel it, even in silence, even in distance, even in the most ordinary moments. And once you reach this point, something profound becomes clear. The twin flame connection was never about searching for them outside yourself. It was about awakening the part of your own soul that could recognize them anywhere, even across the invisible spaces between two hearts. And that realization changes everything. There comes a moment on the twin flame journey when the silence between you begins to feel different. At first, silence is painful. It feels like abandonment, like unfinished conversations hanging in the air, like a story that suddenly stopped in the middle of a sentence. You replay the last message, the last call, the last time you saw them. You wonder what went wrong. Was it something you said? Was it something you didn't say? Or was the connection simply too intense for one of you to handle? For a long time, the silence feels like distance. But eventually something begins to shift. At first, the change is subtle. You wake up one morning and realize something strange. You are not thinking about them the way you used to. Not because you stopped caring, but because the emotional urgency has softened. The constant need to figure everything out is no longer there. Instead of feeling like a wound, the silence begins to feel like space. And space can be healing. In the earlier stages of the twin flame journey, silence often feels like rejection. One person runs, the other chases. The dynamic becomes a cycle of pursuit and retreat. This is what many people call the runner and chaser phase. The runner pulls away because the connection feels overwhelming. The chaser moves closer because the connection feels essential. Both are reacting to the same powerful energy in different ways. But over time, this dynamic cannot continue forever. Something has to change. And that change often begins during the quietest moments. When healing starts happening on a deeper level, both people begin to turn inward. Instead of focusing on each other constantly, they begin focusing on themselves. Old wounds surface. Childhood patterns become clearer. Fears that once hid beneath the surface start demanding attention. This process can feel uncomfortable, but it is necessary. Because twin flames are not meant to complete each other. They are meant to reveal the parts of each other that still need healing. As you move through this stage, the silence between you stops feeling like punishment. Instead, it begins to feel purposeful. You start realizing that if the connection had continued the way it was before, both of you would have remained stuck in the same emotional patterns. The separation was not the end of the connection. It was the space required for transformation. During this phase, something interesting often happens. Your thoughts about them become calmer. Instead of obsessive thinking, memories appear gently. You may remember the way they laughed, the way they looked at you when you first met, the conversations that seemed to last for hours. But these memories no longer create emotional chaos. They feel like reflections instead of open wounds. And that change is a sign of inner growth. Another shift that many twin flames notice during this stage is the return of personal energy. Earlier in the journey, so much attention was focused on the connection that other parts of life felt paused. Dreams were delayed. Goals were forgotten. Creative energy felt blocked. But as emotional balance returns, life begins moving again. You start focusing on your own path, your own happiness, your own purpose. And ironically, this is when the twin flame connection begins to feel healthier, because it is no longer the center of your entire world. It becomes part of your life rather than the definition of it. Sometimes the silence between twin flames lasts months. Sometimes it lasts years. There is no universal timeline. But what matters is what happens internally during that time. If both individuals continue growing, healing, and evolving, the energetic connection between them begins to transform as well. It becomes calmer, more stable, less reactive. And that stability creates a new kind of possibility. Many people expect reunion to happen through dramatic events. They imagine sudden messages, emotional confessions, or unexpected encounters. But often, when twin flames reconnect after deep healing, the moment is surprisingly simple. A message appears. A short conversation begins. There is no explosion of emotion. No overwhelming intensity. Just two people speaking again. But something feels different. The tension that once filled every interaction is gone. The need to prove something is gone. The fear of losing each other again is quieter. Because both of you have changed. One of the most surprising aspects of this stage is how normal the connection can feel. Earlier, everything felt intense. Every look meant something. Every silence felt significant. Every conversation carried emotional weight. But after growth and healing, the connection becomes more grounded. You can talk about everyday things,
Work. Life.
small details, and somehow those ordinary conversations feel just as meaningful as the dramatic ones once did. This is when many twin flames begin to understand something important. The connection was never meant to trap you in emotional intensity forever. It was meant to guide you toward emotional maturity, toward self-awareness, toward unconditional love. Not the kind of love that demands constant reassurance, but the kind of love that respects freedom. Freedom is an essential part of the twin flame journey. Without it, the connection becomes dependency instead of growth. But once both people rediscover their independence, the energy between them changes dramatically. Instead of pulling each other into emotional extremes, they begin supporting each other's evolution, even if they are not physically together. Another realization often appears during this stage. You begin to see your twin flame as a human being again. Earlier in the journey, it is easy to place them on a pedestal. They become the center of your emotional universe. But over time, you begin recognizing their flaws, fears, and struggles more clearly. And instead of diminishing the connection, this actually deepens it. Because true love does not require perfection. It only requires understanding. Sometimes, during this phase, you may hear about their life again. Through mutual friends, through social media, or through direct communication. And instead of feeling jealousy or anxiety, you feel something different.
Acceptance.
You understand that both of you needed your own experiences to grow. Different relationships, different lessons, different paths. All of it was part of the journey. When the silence between twin flames begins to change, it does not always mean reunion will happen immediately. But it does mean the energy between you is evolving. The connection is no longer defined by pain, confusion, or emotional chaos. It is becoming something calmer, something wiser, something more balanced. At this point, you stop asking one question that used to dominate your mind. Will we end up together? Instead, a different question appears. What am I becoming through this journey? And when you begin focusing on that question, something powerful happens. You realize the twin flame path was never only about the other person. It was also about discovering the deepest parts of yourself. Your strength, your patience, your ability to love without control. Eventually, you understand something that once seemed impossible. The silence between you was never empty. It was full of transformation. Every moment apart shaped who you were becoming. Every unanswered message taught emotional independence. Every lonely night revealed parts of your soul that needed healing. And when you finally look back at the journey, you begin to see the silence differently. It was not a pause in the story. It was one of the most important chapters, because in that silence, two people were quietly becoming the versions of themselves that could one day meet again. Not from desperation, not from unfinished wounds, but from wholeness.
Thank you for spending this moment with me. If this message resonated with your soul, remember to subscribe and continue this journey with us here on Twin Flame Journey. And always remember, what is meant for your soul will always find its way back to you. Until next time, beautiful soul, trust the journey.